Hello everyone, this is Jillian and I'm going to do my part of the presentation. I'm sorry I couldn't make it today, but I'll see you all next week. But I'm going to talk about trending statistics within addictions and recognized addictions within the DSM-5. So first I'll talk about the DSM-5. So as you can see, there's two categories that are considered addiction: substance use and behavioral addiction. Now I was surprised to see that gambling is the only behavioral addiction according to the DSM-5. I would have assumed pornography or shopping to possibly be addictions, but those are not considered addictions according to the DSM-5. But just a couple facts: about 24 million Americans over the age of 12 have used illicit drugs or abused medications, over-the-counter prescription, in the last month. Okay, so that's a little bit close to 1 in 10 Americans over the age of 12. Okay, and an illicit drug is any drug that's illegal. So the studies that I'm looking at come from the National Institute of Health, and they considered marijuana an illicit drug because even though we're headed towards legalizing marijuana, a lot of these studies are from 2013 or 2006, so marijuana was still considered illegal. So I'll tell a little bit about how teens are affected by this. Okay, so most teens who abuse prescription drugs, they were given to them by a friend or a family member. So I find that interesting to note because just thinking how that affects how we as possible pastors or counselors interact with families and teens, and just seeing how roles and rituals within families may affect how their children interact with the world and possibly are even vulnerable to addiction. And then along with that, nearly 40% of 12th graders have used alcohol and 21% have used marijuana in the past month. Okay, so I'll just quickly go over some possible addictions that may not be recognized within the DSM-5, or actually that are not recognized within the DSM-5, are shopping, binge eating, video games, internet, social media, electronic devices, and sex and pornography. Now, specifically with video games, according to the DSM-5, they're considered another mental disorder separate from addictions. And then a lot of these other ones would be under compulsive disorders. But I find it interesting that they did not consider these to be addictions. Okay, so just some trending facts about addictions in the United States. If you look at this study right here, it comes from the National Survey of Drug Use and Health from 2005. National survey, over or about 70% of people from this study struggle specifically with alcohol abuse. And I find this interesting to consider as counselors and possible pastors in the future, because I just want us to consider how alcohol can be that silent killer within the church or even within families, and how it will be important for us to truly assess clients, if we're counseling people, or just listen and try to understand the people within the family system as we counsel and give care to see possible hidden addictions and what that may mean for families. Okay? Now, this specific chart focuses on illicit drugs. And from this chart, they found that 2.8 million Americans tried drugs for the first time. And from this chart, as you can see, 70% of those 2.8 million initiates are using marijuana, and about 13% are using painkillers. So again, marijuana may as well become that second silent killer within families, especially because it's being legalized. It may be easier to access. And as I was reading, I found that many younger individuals don't consider marijuana use drug use or a drug addiction. So that may also contribute to it being a silent killer within families. If it becomes an addiction to the point where it is halting an individual from doing activities of daily living, okay? And this is just another chart that shows us, as you can see, marijuana is leading in drug dependence and abuse, with pain relievers right after that, okay? And this is a chart that talks a little bit about the trending addictions according to ages. So if we look all the way at the end of the chart, you can see tranquilizers, surprisingly, are popular amongst people over the age of 25, right next to that sedatives, okay? So anxiety medications are popular now amongst people around that age. So that's one thing to consider too. What does that mean as you're counseling individuals and paying attention to how they interact with family and friends and the resources or even the vulnerability that they have to addictions? Maybe there's someone in their family who struggles with anxiety, and maybe this individual has an underlying anxiety themselves and they self-medicate with sedatives. So just some things to consider, okay? Now, when we look at the teen years, or let's say between 15 and 20, okay, inhalants are also trending on this chart as well. And that can be anything from inhaling spray paint to anything in a can just to get a quick high. So those are important things to consider, again, as pastors, what that means when you're dealing with families and how teens are able to even access the information. Does it come from a family member, similar to teens who take the over-the-counter drugs, or do they learn about these different ways to get high from school members? And what that means to how they interact with their peers, with their siblings, if they have any, and with their parents. And what are some ways that we can educate these families and also give care to help them work through these varying addictions that can affect them. Okay. Now, I didn't talk about smoking yet, but smoking is another addiction that is considered an addiction according to the DSM-5. Okay, so as you can see, smoking is trending downwards in the United States. But if you look at the bottom, it's starting to slowly come back up again between the ages of 12 and 17. Okay, and that could be related to the vulnerability of teens during this age, with their need to be accepted. It could be learned. It could be a variety of different things. Okay. Now I'll talk a little bit about gambling disorders as well. So as you can see, substance use disorders. And this is another chart, and this comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. As you can see, the difference between substance use disorders and gambling disorders. Substance use has a bigger impact on Americans and families, but that's more according to numbers. But as you can see, gambling definitely has a huge impact as well. Okay. Now this chart shows, according to gambling addictions, the amount of calls for those struggling with this addiction and the amount of treatment that actually happens. So as you can see, there is a huge amount of calls, and this goes according to different states in the United States. There's a huge amount of calls that happen for people asking for help, but the amount of people that actually go through with the care is low. And that's important to consider because, as we all know, when it comes to addiction, denial can be a huge part that can really affect how a person reacts to their addiction, and it can affect how they react to their family members. So just keeping that in mind, it's very important to try to connect with the individual or with the family and see how you can get to know them first before you spew too much information on them, because that connection is definitely necessary during this vulnerable time. One thing to note, if you look at the chart, interestingly, Illinois actually has a pretty good treatment enrollment. It's actually a little higher than calls for help. Now that's according to this study. So if you all are staying in Illinois, that can be a good thing to consider. Okay, so that's the end of my part, and thank you everyone, and I hope to see you all next week. Okay, bye-bye.